My phone call was successful because joining us here momentarily via Zoom is WCNC Charlotte Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich, who I saw earlier in the day, and I know saw this in his own backyard. And Brad, we'll pull up some of your video here in just a moment. But I don't know, Brad, if you're able to do a screen share on your side from a radar source of your choosing. But I know Jared was just trying to show us from the Charleston radar or the Wilmington radar what seems to be
You
radar
guys see
indication of
that?
this balloon. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So can you see that image right there?
Yeah, so we see it. Go ahead.
So I actually pulled up the Wilmington radar, and what's interesting here is I'm looking at GR analyst here, and you can see there is a debris signature on the radar. But what I think is really fascinating is when you look at the cross section here. So I'm going to pull up a cross section. Let me see if I can get the right cross section here, and you can actually see the altitude where it starts coming back down. So let me do a couple things here. Let's see if I can't get it to pop up. We'll go in a little bit closer here and try to do a little cross section. But what I thought was interesting was you can actually see the basically the debris coming back down to the ground somewhere right in there. So about 20,000 feet is where I started to see on the radar begin to fall to the ground, but it's clearly pretty far offshore. When you see the videos, guys, you see it looks like it's right over Myrtle Beach, but just looking at where the radar signature and the debris field, it is really well offshore. So it does appear that the Air Force at least waited till this thing was really far removed from land. And the video is pretty amazing. This is going to be one of the most well-documented looks like a missile strikes that I have seen. Initially, I thought, man, maybe they're going to use some kind of, kinetic weapon of some kind that would be like, some kind of machine gun or some kind of a firing device like that. But you can clearly see from the fighter jet that it launched a missile because you can see the contrail from and the vapor trail from the missile as it was launched. And then you see the balloon deflate and then start coming back down to the ground. A lot of debris, though, honestly, when you see the video and looking at the radar imagery, that's a lot of debris for a balloon. So kind of shows you how big that thing actually was and how much was attached to it.
I think a lot of people probably want to know exactly what was attached to that, and we may start to get some of those answers here in a little bit. Brad Panovich joining us here, giving us some breakdown of the radar signature, because as Brad mentioned, this is so far off the coast.
Yeah.
We're no longer really getting a lot of eyeballs on this. There is, of course, some video like we've been showing you from our own Scotty Powell in Myrtle Beach, who did see and hear it when the United States government decided to take some action on this just a short time ago. And Scotty was telling us he heard two booms and then watched that white dot start to descend from the sky, where the radar that Brad was just showing us allows us to kind of get at least a little bit of an update here on at what level in the atmosphere this is. Because right before you joined us too, Brad, we were talking about how the airspace was cleared and the ground stop was initiated, as this is now continuing to descend and they're trying to keep commercial aircraft away at a safe distance.
Yeah, just looking at like where the signature on the showed up was around 20,000 feet. So that's, this obviously happened much higher than that, but the debris didn't show up until the radar actually hit it. What's interesting too, and from the video and looking at some of the radar signature, it looks like the Air Force purposely hit the balloon part and not the payload part, because you see the balloon kind of deflate, like the missile went through the balloon and deflated, and whatever was attached to it's falling straight down to the ground, with the remnants of the balloon almost acting like a streamer, or almost acting like some kind of parachute to slow down the descent. So whatever the payload was is likely, if it survives impact with the water surfaces, it wasn't completely destroyed. So I think that was on purpose, guys, to kind of save whatever payload was attached to it. And if you look at some of the ship tracking, there are several military, Navy, Coast Guard ships in this vicinity, clearly to recover whatever makes it to the water surface.
Yeah, we're continuing to look as well at Flight Tracker to see what we can infer on whether or not it has descended to a safe level. Still not seeing commercial aircraft returning to any sort of really normal operations there. But I'll also say I'm no longer seeing a lot of the military aircraft that we were
Yeah.
seeing on Flight Tracker earlier. Now,
I was just going to say there's a stratotanker, which is basically the air refueling for those fighter jets. It was circling off Myrtle Beach. It is now looks like it's returning to base. So that's a sign that whatever they're doing in the air is pretty much done. I would expect we'll probably start to see some helicopters maybe heading that area to help for the search for the debris. But yeah, you're right. The fighter jets and the tanker, which was refueling those fighter jets. I assume they're F-14s. I didn't get a really good look at them from where, but they looked like maybe they could have been F-14s flying initially.
The report is that they were F-22A Raptors.
Oh, wow.
They were Raptors, and it may have been, and Bill Walsh at Channel 5 speculates that it may be the first air-to-air kill ever for the F-22A.
Yeah, that's a pretty newer, that's a very modern aircraft there. So that is really interesting. Maybe, Jared, maybe it was the type of weapon that aircraft has that they wanted to use to be extra safe. Because I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised they used a missile.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to know what exactly they shot, because I'm with you, because I thought it was just going to be a couple tracer rounds and then you just call it a day. But I think the other thing too, the complicating factor is the altitude, 60,000 feet. You think of the service ceiling of some of these aircraft, you don't get that high, which is probably one, why you needed a 22, and two, why you probably needed to fire a missile, because I suspect that, it's just interesting. I wonder, God, this is going to be fascinating. And these things we may never know. But yeah, I mean, that would make sense, that would happen. But yeah, no, I've still got it. Yeah, I've still got it on radar here. I've, watching it drift, and you can definitely see that it's definitely a debris field that is starting to shear out a little bit too. You're starting to see, it's come from a very tight, a very tight looking signature to something that's a little bit more elongated.
Yeah, I don't know what type of balloon this was. Most of the Weather Service balloons are latex. So this obviously wasn't a latex balloon, probably. It was some other type of material. But when it was impacted by the missile or whatever weapon they used, it looked like it shredded. There was tons of pieces that were coming off of it. And what looked like smoke, it really wasn't smoke. It was whatever the debris material of the balloon envelope. And I think you got a really good idea how big that is. At altitude, that thing is probably the size of a bus. It was a huge balloon.
Yeah, they were saying 3 buses.
That is not small.
Yeah, that's why they didn't take it down over land. There's a lot of people say, why haven't we shot it down? Why haven't we shot it down? Well, I mean, wherever that thing lands, it's going to do a lot of damage. You've got to shoot it down over the water.
Matter of fact, we actually, Brad, we have the video you shot earlier today when the balloon came through portions of South Charlotte. We can show some of that here on the screen. What was that like for you to catch it this morning out your back door?
It was interesting. Evan Fisher, started posting this morning. He was getting pictures of it from the Asheville area in Western North Carolina. So I kind of started extrapolating. Okay, that means it's going to be in my Western horizon, probably close to 9:30ish, 10 o'clock. And initially I went out and I didn't see anything. And I went way in my backyard because I have a little spot where I couldn't see almost due west. And as soon as I looked that direction, just above the tree line, I saw it. And I'm like, holy cow, there it is. It was really easy to see with the naked eye. I kind of joked on my video. I didn't even have my glasses on and I could see it pretty well. So it was really easy to see. I had the binoculars out. And then taking the video of it, it was really fascinating. The level that it was at, the mid-level and upper-level jet stream was pretty much flying today over the Carolinas. For a balloon, it was moving pretty well. Think about it. This morning at sunrise, it was near the Tennessee border. And here, at 2:30ish, it's off the coast of South Carolina being shot down. That's a pretty fast-moving balloon, to be honest with you.
I think a lot of us were surprised at the tracking of it. When you first spot it in the sky, as we can see in your video, it doesn't look like it's moving all that fast because it's so high up and so far away. But you step inside, you come back, as I did for a cup of coffee, and you're like, oh yeah, it is moving at do we have any idea what the winds are like at 60,000 feet, Brad?
Well, today, that's a good question. Last night I looked, there was a little jet streak over North Carolina, Virginia. So it was probably right on the edge of that jet streak. And I'm guessing up there, that had to be well over 100 miles an hour. up at that altitude. Now, again, the jet stream is, probably going to be more in that 25 to 35 mile an hour range. But again, it definitely looked like it was a little bit lower than it was when it was over the central and western U.S. Remember when it was over Montana, the Pentagon estimated it was close to 80 to 100,000 feet. Then over Missouri, they started saying, oh, it's close to 60,000 feet. By the time it got here, I would imagine it was probably more in the 30 to 40 or 50,000 range. It definitely was closer to the ground than I think it was out west as it was moving. The one way, James, the one way I knew it was moving fast, I zoomed in with my 300 millimeter lens and did a video. And just to watch it in the frame in the back of my camera, how quickly it was moving, I was like, wow, that is actually, it's got some speed to it because it changed the position in the sky fairly quickly. One of the reasons it was so visible in the Western Carolinas, we had the perfect visibility. It happened close or shortly after sunrise. It was in the western sky, sunrise is in the eastern sky, and it illuminated that balloon vividly against the blue, crystal clear Carolina blue sky. And then as it got closer to the sun, it was hard to see because it was basically, the lighting was not very ideal. I'm kind of curious. I want to pull up the ship tracking and see where these ships are going, because I think that's going to be the next thing to see what ships are responding in that area. Have they opened the airspace yet? I wonder.
So Jared was saying a few moments ago that he thought that the airspace was being reopened. The ground stop, we know for sure, goes until 5:15.
Wow, that's going to have a big impact on air travel on the East Coast. I mean, that's another reason, you don't shoot it down over land. Could you imagine them having to shut down major airports over the U.S. for a whole afternoon?
Well, and that's where in the last 2 hours, this began to feel a little bit different than it had the whole rest of the day.
Yeah.
Whereas as the airspace was being shut down, we're looking again here at video shot by the Carolina Weather Group over Myrtle Beach, where 2 booms were heard from those military aircraft that had been stalking the balloon. And the balloon still, as far as we know, is working on making its way down. The United States government confirming they have shot down the Chinese spy balloon and will be recovering its assets from the Atlantic Ocean here shortly. We are still awaiting to find out exactly when U.S. government officials may address the public and come to a microphone someplace to tell us what they have done and answer some questions. There are obviously lots of questions out there about when and why and how and what. And we don't know those answers still at this time. But what we do know at 3:12 here on the Saturday afternoon is that the airspace still seems pretty void of commercial aircraft. Following what appears to have been military action by the United States government here of the so-called Chinese surveillance balloon, which had been traversing the country for the last couple of days and made its way across the Carolinas throughout much of today, and then not much longer than moving offshore in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Here in the Carolinas, this national and international story playing out over our heads as soon as that balloon was somewhere out over the water. Matter of fact, Brad, I know you're working on bringing up the boat tracking to see, because not only are there government agencies that will clear the air, but they will also clear the ground and move people out of the way. But we had a great tweet a little while ago that gave us some good insights, and pilots are familiar with this, of course, but it shows us exactly where the airspace has been closed. And I'm going to put that on the screen here. I apologize. I know you guys are in Zoom and can't see it, but for the viewers watching right now on the public broadcast from the Carolina Weather Group and WCNC Plus, you can see in that no-fly zone off the coast of Wilmington and Charleston how far out to sea. They're really giving themselves some wiggle room here as this comes on down.
Yeah, I see a Navy ship cruising towards that debris field right now. I'm trying to look at the vessel details here. I'm pulling it up on my screen right now. It looks like some kind of frigate, but it's definitely a Navy ship, and it is flying. It's moving straight towards that area, so it is moving quick. But what's interesting, looking at some of the vessel traffic out there, there are some commercial vessels out there. There's a couple cruise ships not too far away and it looks like a fishing and an oil vessel of some kind as well. So it the ship that's heading there departed Morehead City this morning and has been cruising in that direction. So yeah, it's they're definitely heading in that general direction right now, and it looks like they're intercepting right where that debris field kind of fell straight down. I haven't seen any helicopters. I'm kind of interested. The Coast Guard didn't have like a helicopter out there, maybe checking it out as well.
Well, we know some of those fighter jets, obviously, were not showing up on Flight Tracker, although their refueling aircraft were. So
yeah,
I'd be curious to know what else is out there that maybe we can't see. I've still been watching radar on the side of our screen. Folks who were with us a few moments ago know that the Weather Service radar were picking up the debris as it was falling, and that has now disappeared off of the lowest measurement that the Weather Service radar can get us, and that is at let's see here, that's approximately, what's the beam height of this?
I've still got it on Wilmington, I think.
Okay, let me switch over to Wilmington then. Oh,
but
yeah,
it's a little bit way out. That looks like the lighter stuff that is floating in the wind. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, you're seeing that debris start to get into like 2,000 feet. So I mean, this is about down.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if there's a little bit of a redirection to the south once it gets into that northeasterly, a little bit more northeasterly wind field. But
you can kind of see it if I play it back, Jared, over the last course of the last couple of frames. It's going to kind of be right in here. You can kind of see, it's drifting further offshore.
Yes. Yep.
Play this back again one more time. So here's about 2:45. You can kind of see it. It's right. Oh, we just got a new picture, so it jumped on me. But right there, about 2:45. Then right about there now at 2:50, 3 o'clock, and you can kind of see how it just. And it is, I think Brad said it, it's spreading out. It's becoming elongated.
So if there's the heavier debris is probably going to fall more straight down. That lighter debris is drifting downwind. So my guess is, somewhere in the vicinity where the brighter reflectivity was occurring with the debris field is probably going to be the spot they're going to look for, because what they're going to want to recover is, if you saw some of the zoomed in pictures, you saw that huge solar array, and whatever instrumentation, antennas, whatever is on there is probably what they're going to want to recover, just to see what type of devices. Now, I don't know what value there is to if there's actually stuff on there that it recorded. It was probably all being transmitted somewhere, but they can tell by the type of instruments what kind of was it acoustic listening, was it visual? Obviously there was probably some kind of cameras. Was there something else that they were sampling, maybe doing some type of jamming of signals? I mean, you think about all the things people often, when this is happening, are going, why are they using such low tech? We've got spy satellites and all these other things. Well, the balloon can hover over areas for long periods of time. And, satellites, as great as they are, first of all, they cost a fortune, and they're not geostationary. Usually they're going to be orbiting. So they're only going to get so many times a day that we've got, images. And let's be honest, the greatest satellites still aren't going to get a better picture of something that's actually in our atmosphere. It's going to have a closer in. But to me, the thing that's interesting, you're close enough to the surface where you can intercept radio communication, right? Was that what they were trying to do? Were they trying to, get some information there? So a lot's going to happen here in the next couple of days. There'll be a lot of questions asked. I know a lot of people want to know, why did it take so long? Hey, here's the thing. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but I would trust the experts in the military. They clearly had a plan that they were going to wait for this thing to be over open water. They were circling it yesterday with planes. They were, I would assume, jamming it, collecting information on it, doing all kinds of stuff. So I think we'll find out a lot more information. I think it's okay to ask questions, but if you don't know all the behind the scenes stuff, sometimes you just can't assume you know everything, because there's a lot of things we don't know.
Yeah, the defense secretary about 5 minutes ago released a statement. I'll read it here. This afternoon, at the direction of President Biden, U.S. fighter aircraft assigned to the U.S. Northern Command successfully brought down the high-altitude surveillance balloon launched by and belonging to the People's Republic of China over the water off the coast of South Carolina in U.S. airspace. The balloon, which was being used by the PRC in an attempt to surveil strategic sites in the continental United States, was brought down above U.S. territorial waters. On Wednesday, President Biden gave his authorization to take down the surveillance balloon as soon as the mission could be accomplished without undue risk to American lives under the balloon's path. After careful analysis, U.S. military commanders had determined downing the balloon while over land posed an undue risk to people across a wide area due to the size and altitude of the balloon and its surveillance payload. In accordance with the president's direction, the Department of Defense developed options to take down the balloon safely over our territorial waters while closely monitoring its path and intelligence collection activities. This action was taken in coordination and with the full support of the Canadian government, and we thank Canada for its contribution to tracking and analysis of the balloon through NORAD as it transited North America. Today's deliberate and lawful action demonstrates that President Biden and his national security team will always put the safety and security of the American people first while responding effectively to the PRC's unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. That is from Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense. So there you go. And that's exactly it. They didn't want to bring it down over land because as we're seeing on radar, we're seeing that debris spread over a wide area. Yeah, we don't want it. They don't want to do that. So, Brett, I think what we're speculating here is pretty well confirmed now by the Secretary of Defense, and definitely what we're picking up on weather radar right now is making that decision look, just and safe.
Yeah, that Navy ship I'm tracking is still moving at about 20 knots due west, so it's still heading towards something. I keep waiting to see for it to slow down to get a good gauge on maybe at the surface. And again, this ship does have a helicopter helipad on it, so they probably have helicopters they've launched as well to go look for the debris. And then they'll use the crane or whatever devices they have on the ship to maybe get it out of the water. You got to get there, but hopefully it doesn't all sink. That's the other thing you worry about. Stuff could be sinking as well.
As of 3:14, the FAA says that normal operations are resuming from Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, and Charleston.
Yeah, I'm starting to see planes taking off at Myrtle Beach and all three of those airports now. So that's a good sign.
Kind of funny. That's actually where I was supposed to be headed. I'm supposed to go up to the outlets to buy some jeans, and I took a little detour to the beach. But the outlet store that I was going to go to is actually right next to Charleston International Airport. Beautiful place for plane spotting, actually. So. It'll be interesting to see, how that ends up. But again, I think
not only are commercial aircraft starting to take off again, but Brad, we do have just departing outside of Charleston here, the U.S. Coast Guard helicopter.
Yeah.
Whether
and
that's
I just
connected or not, we have no idea.
Yeah. So the ship I was keeping an eye on, I didn't have a name. It's the USS Carter Hall, which is heading in that direction. So yeah, now that we got the Coast Guard helicopters taken off as well, that makes a lot of sense. They're probably going to start scouring for debris. Here's the thing you want to be careful of too. There's a lot of, basically, civilian boats and aircraft out there. We don't want civilians picking up random pieces of this Chinese balloon because it's national security interest. So that's why I'm surprised that the marine traffic hasn't been cleared out as much as it has either.
That is very interesting because it obviously is going to come down somewhere in the water. And before you joined our conversation here today, Brad, we were talking about what this theoretically could look like without having eyes out there. I'm envisioning some sort of crossover between how NASA scoops things up out of the water after a splashdown and how SpaceX manages to actually land vessels back onto a boat. But being that this is not under any control of the U.S. government, I'm guessing they're going to try to scoop it back up out of the water.
Yeah, and that solar array and the instrumentation, I'm guessing for at least part of the time, the balloon remnants are buoyant enough that it would stay near the surface temporarily, but I would think it's going to sink fairly quickly. So I would assume there's divers on the standby as well to go in and maybe submersibles to head down underwater and grab whatever debris makes it down there.
We may never fully know. But hopefully we get some answers from officials later on this afternoon as we continue to track the debris signature on radar. This is normal National Weather Service radar. We are looking right now at a signature that is about 35 miles off the coast of North Myrtle Beach and continuing to move over the course of the last few minutes further offshore. So if you're right now in Myrtle Beach or out at Bullhead Island, Oak Island, you may be able to see some of this, if not during the operation because of the distance, but maybe when they start bringing things back on shore here in a little bit. They'll obviously have to figure out where they're going to bring it back into the country.
Yeah, it's it's interesting to say the least. And for those, that, you'll know there are tensions between China and the U.S. And I think the big story from this is going to be what was on that. That might really determine how big of a breach of national security this was. And maybe it's a threat, that we have to keep an eye on the future. There's a lot of people speculating that this maybe not much of a balloon, but that it was a test to see about a response, how the U.S. would respond to something like this. So there's way more questions than answers. And I hate to be like you see on Twitter and Facebook. It's just people just randomly speculating and throwing out things as if it's fact. And we just don't know. It's like, yesterday we saw all kinds of people posting pictures of simple contrails in Montana thinking that was an explosion or something. And you look at the video and like, that's just an airplane contrail. That's not an explosion. So it definitely makes people very anxious and worried. And so you just start jumping to conclusions. And usually when you do that, you make the wrong conclusion. So as much as we want to talk about it, I do want to be very careful about, what we speculate about, because we just don't know.
I will say Storm Chaser Nick on Twitter, he is the meme king of weather Twitter. Tweets that the gender reveals are getting out of control. And
I know.
As a big pink poof where the balloon was shot. It's just really funny.
Yeah.
I can also see on Twitter some news agencies affiliated with the Chinese government also reporting now, CGTN specifically, that the U.S. has shot down the balloon. They obviously don't call it a surveillance balloon. I thought it was interesting they didn't call it a weather balloon either, which is what they in the Chinese government were previously referring to this as. But the news reports making that side of the ocean as well.
Yeah, listen, it's a world story.
It is a world story that came home right here to the Carolinas. And I think we're going to probably leave it about there as we await further answers from the U.S. government on what did and did not happen. And we look forward to the opportunity to hear from them, and also for reporters to get to ask their own questions, to hold the officials accountable here on what has transpired not only today off the coast of South Carolina, but also over the United States over the last couple of days. I would encourage everyone who's watching or listening with us to stay tuned and subscribed. I know right now we're on WCNC Plus, and they will have updates on the WCNC Plus and the WCNC apps throughout the day as information becomes available. For those of you here on the Carolina Weather Group, I know we talk about weather, we talk about space, we talk about technology. I don't think I ever foresaw a day where we'd be tracking a surveillance balloon, but this clearly became a crossover with weather and avionics here in a very peculiar Saturday afternoon, gentlemen.
If there's a ridge set up over the east, this goes in a very different place. It goes over New York. Because,
if this thing was truly non-maneuverable and just at the whim of the weather patterns, this thing could have ended up in 1,000 different locations. But
if it falls over land, you got all kinds of issues of, like I said, out there, there's less people for it to fall on and less people to go grab material over the water. Like I said, there are a handful of ships out there, but there's 5. You know exactly everybody who's out over the water right now. If this falls over central U.S. and parts fall in people's backyards, you may never see them again. So there's a lot of reasons for it. I can see a lot of reasons that they did it this way, and it's really, it's like I said, it's everybody wants to be mad about something. It's like if no matter what happened, there was somebody was going to get upset over this whole thing. It's a big deal, It's an invasion of privacy. It's national security issues. So there's a lot going on here. So it is very interesting to see that the way they executed this so quickly today. As you guys mentioned, it went from like, hey, it's going to be over the Western Carolinas to, oh my gosh, they're shutting airspace down. And the actual, I don't know if you read that notice to airman, it actually said deadly force was likely going to be used over this no-fly area. And you're like, wow, that's pretty specific. You don't normally see that in a notice to airmen from the FAA, but and the other thing that was interesting, I don't know if Jared, if you read that whole thing, basically cautioning against drones and other aircraft to stay out of that area, and they would be met with deadly force as well, which was pretty dramatic verbiage just in there.
You don't, generally speaking, you don't want to be on the business end of an F-22. That's just a general rule I try to live my life by. And it's probably good that they, spelled that out. I think it was pretty obvious what was going to happen when they started closing the airspace. But yeah, that really spelled it out. I mean, that was, there you go. Woo!
Yeah, I had to read it twice, and I'm like, wow, I don't think I've ever read this in an FAA notice before. It was pretty specific. Usually they're very cryptic, like national security zone, stay out, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, you're just guessing. Well, they were like, hey, this is what's happening. Do not come in here. It was like,
they pretty much could have just said, we're going to shoot down the balloon.
Yeah, but I think the thing they were worried about was other people would see that and take their drones and fly them and try to get in there to go viral to catch this all. And they said, if you do that, you're going to be shot down as well. So they weren't messing around when they did that. So that was pretty specific. And I'm glad they lifted it early, because that's a huge impact for folks that are traveling out of Charleston, Myrtle Beach, or Wilmington. Those aren't huge airports, I know, for most of the country, but for regionally, those are pretty important airports, especially if you're trying to go to the coast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all flight restrictions have now been lifted. The ground stops have been ended. U.S. commercial airspace is open again along the North Carolina and South Carolina coast after being shut down, as Brad was alluding to, for military exercise here, as the United States government has shot down the Chinese surveillance balloon off the coast of Myrtle Beach. And any moment now, we expect that that'll come down into the waters, as it is just barely still visible on some of the lowest scans of Weather Service radar. Right now, the closest one out of Wilmington has it at about 3,000 feet or less. And so we will, again, continue to watch for hopefully some answers to follow. We know everyone has lots of questions, so stay subscribed wherever you are. Thank you for joining us here on this very unusual Saturday afternoon on WCNC Plus, the Carolina Weather Group, and other places, as we've been tracking what was a remarkable crossover between weather, news, and military action here at home and on the home front. And again, updates to follow throughout the afternoon. But special thanks to Brad Panovich, Chief Meteorologist at WCNC Charlotte. We had Jared Smith from the Carolina Weather Group in Charleston, along with Scotty Powell and Evan Fisher. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. I'm not sure how to close this one out. We'll talk to you again real soon. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoon, and stay tuned to updates to follow throughout the day on the WCNC app.